Good evening, everyone. Here is a short lecture on the famous contemporary Pakistani poet Ahmad Faraz, whom I call the Nightingale of the Hills. In Urdu and Persian, it will be Bulbul-e Kohsar. Ahmad Faraz, the Nightingale of the Hills, is buried in Islamabad, all right, but who could ever bury Faraz Sahib's ideas and aesthetic exuberance? Our heartless establishment of the day ignored his last rites in 2008, though the people did not. The establishment ostrich buried its head in the sand once again. The then high and mighty were not reported to be in attendance of the funeral rites of a great son of Pakistan. However, Faraz Sahib's aesthetic presence shines eternal and can never be detracted from by anyone's pettiness. The man was like a flowing wave of aesthetics, surging with pleasure of love and love of life, in poetry, in life, and in politics. His eternal motivation was love, love of the beautiful, love of the natural, and love of the people and the motherland. How can the glory and glow of this overflowing love be overshadowed by the pettiness of political self importance? But let us celebrate the man for what he was for generations of his countrymen and what he is bound to remain for generations to come. His poetry and persona were and are both unique and very similar indeed. The way he disciplined his creative energy in his remarkably lucid verse was a straightforward reflection of his deep inner vitality, which he kept under control through a rather deceptive casualness of demeanor and compose. However, neither Faraz Sahib's poetry nor he himself was simple. In fact, he instinctively understood the deepest intricacies of human psychology. And that is what gave his verse the power to grip the minds of successive generations in South Asia and, of course, throughout the world. This deceptive simplicity of his poetry has kept many of his detractors from grasping the psychological depths that his literary work could touch. But the greatest of his contemporary writers like Faiz Ahmad Faiz, Ahmad Nadeem Qasmi, and a host of others understood and appreciated the relationship between his ever growing popularity among the people and his deep grasp of human psychology expressed with great ease in apparently simple terms. This level of artistic command was achieved by him through rigorous linguistic discipline and mastery of the great tradition of Urdu and Persian poetry. Nobody should remain under the illusion that Faraz Sahib's poetry lacks intellectual depth. The depth is there, but it can be uncovered only after one trains oneself to the poet's level of artistic sophistication. His verse does not display its psychological insight on its surface. It carries them in its heart. Love is what Faraz used as a common thread for addressing the deepest yearnings of human soul in relation to one's person as well as in relation to one's society and motherland. This connects him with Ghalib and Faiz just as it connects him with Hafiz and Badin. This type of poets is known to understand man's existential situation in the world through the experience of love. They take this experience and bring it to bear on issues of morality and social justice, glories of all that is beautiful and sublime in the universe, and challenges that weigh on our hearts in the form of human limitations. Look at some of the examples of Faraz Sahib's art in these areas. ए खुदा जो भी मुझे पंदे शकेबाई दे, उसकी आंखों को मेरे जख्म की गहराई दे। और ये गलियों में कैसा शोर था, हलचल सी क्यों मख्तल में थी। गलियों में कैसा शोर था, हलचल सी क्यों मख्तल में थी। क्या वस्फ उस शाहिर में था, क्या बात उस पागल में थी। और सुना है उसके शबिस्तां से मुत्तसिल है बहिश्त। सुना है उसके शबिस्तां से मुत्तसिल है बहिश्त। मकीं उधर के भी जलवे इधर के देखते हैं। और जब्त लाजम है मगर दुख है कयामत का फराज। जालिम अब के भी न रोएगा तो मर जाएगा। These are just a few examples from a large number of verses that he composed using the experience of love and similes and metaphors related to it to touch upon the deeper issues of life and its realities. However, these examples make it abundantly clear that his love metaphors go much deeper than the surface meanings and can be, can, by bringing paradise next to his beloved's nightly abode, submerge the transcendent into the worldly. Also, a mere image of a poet with insane visions being dragged to death in the midst of a crowd in commotion conveys a whole narrative of man's struggle and sacrifices against ongoing oppression in human history. And how else to bring out the limitations of man's moral self discipline except through pointing towards the crushing weight of existential agonies? Faraz Sahib's genius consists in constructing images and metaphors accessible in their multiple meanings, both to the lay and the sophisticated. Of course, he also wrote a sizable amount of direct resistance poetry, whose apex expression is his famous poem Muhasara or The Siege. In this type of poetry, he used imagery that derives basically from the classical tradition of warfare and weaponry. But his images were always refreshing because he connected them with a deep layer of personal emotion and turned the collective oppression of society into a personal tragedy. This happened not only in Muhasara, but the poem that he wrote immediately after the fall of Dhaka, and many others. In fact, Muhasara opens in a very personal way with the warfare imagery. मेरे गनीम ने मुझको प्याम भेजा है कि हल्का जन है मेरे गिर्द लश्करी उसके फसील शेर के हर बुर्ज हर मुनारे पर कमां बदस्त सितादा है अस्करी उसके. As can be seen, this is a much more direct imagery. However, its use is aimed at personalizing the experience of oppression that society as a whole is suffering. This personalizing element is what connected people so readily with Faraz Sahib's resistance poetry as well. Obviously, it will take time before all aspects of his ghazals, poems, and a qasida, basically his tribute to writing that he wrote so artfully, are fully uncovered and evaluated by critics. In these short remarks, the point is just to note the depth dimension of his poetry and to pay tribute to this great nightingale of the hills, Bulbul Kosar, who thrived under the orange orchards of Islamia College, Peshawar, where he sang some of the greatest of his songs and where we listened to him mesmerized as his students in early 70s. His departure in 2008 has left our hearts bereft of the joys of expectations for his new creations, though his exuberant ghazals and powerful resistance poetry will forever keep us grounded in great values of love and justice for all. His resistance poems, شہر نامہ، کر گئے کوچ کہاں، ابھی ہم خوبصورت ہیں، وہ لمحے کتنے درو گو تھے، اور اے میرے وطن کے خوش نواؤ، نامہ جانا غنیم سے، اب وہ کہتے ہیں کالی دیوار، بیروت، سلامتی کونسل اینڈ ویتنام ایکسیٹرا all overflow with his great artistic creativity, deep yearning for social justice for all, and love of the motherland and its people. Look at these lines in Sher Nama. میرے پاسباں میرے نقبزن، میرا ملک مل کے یتیم ہے، میرا دیس میرے سپاہ کا، میرا شہر مال غنیم ہے. اور پھر یہ اینڈ دین دس پیس فرام ہز پوئم اے میرے وطن کے خوش نواؤ. ایک عمر سے عدل و صدق کی لاش غاصب کی صلیب پر جڑی ہے، اس وقت بھی تم غزل سرا ہو جب ظلم کی ہر گھڑی کڑی ہے، اور جنگل پہ لپک رہے ہیں شعلے طاؤس کو رقص کی پڑی ہے. اینڈ دین ہی in his poem کر گئے کوچ کہاں. Look at this piece. سر کسی کا بھی دکھائی نہیں دیتا ہے یہاں، جسم ہی جسم ہے، دستاریں ہی دستاریں ہیں، تو کسی قریہ زنداں میں ہے شاید کہ جہاں توق ہی توق ہیں، دیواریں ہی دیواریں. It bears mentioning that Faraz Sahib's art stood for love and justice for the entire humanity. His translations from resistance poetry of South Africa under the title Sab Aawazein Meri Hain is a testament to universality of his creative imagination in its pursuit of justice and love for all. In the introduction to this book, he emphasizes the responsibilities of writers in grave historical situations where people are being oppressed and where they are giving their lives for their basic human rights. He also underlines the similarities between violations of human rights in South Africa with such violations in Pakistan. He is not with us today, but I'm sure he would have been deeply shocked by the fact that apartheid practiced by the whites in South Africa has not come to an end, but is still being practiced in Palestine by Israel and has been expanded into a genocide with the full support of the weapons and intelligence services of the leading Western powers such as US, United Kingdom, France, and Germany, who do not consider Palestinian lives as equivalent to those of their own presumed race. Faraz Sahib's poetic intuition is prophetic in his poem Abu Jihad, which was addressed to Yasser Arafat. ابو جہاد میرا دل لہو لہو ہے مگر معاف کر کے تیرے دشمنوں کے ساتھ ہیں ہم، تیرا جنوں تیرا ایثار محترم، لیکن جو سچ کہوں تو تیرے قاتلوں کے ساتھ ہیں ہم. ہمیں تو ہیں وہ ستمگر کہ مصلحت جن کی دراز دستی قاتل کا دل بڑھاتی ہے، ہم اس قبیلہ عشاق سے نہیں کہ جنہیں ندیم دوست سے خوشبو دوست آتی ہے. South African poetry that he translated is heart-wrenching. Early lines of David Evans' poem, If Poets Must Have Flags, or, and this is his translation, Faraz Sahib's translation, وہ کہتے ہیں با آبرو شاعری کرو جن سے ان کی صفاکیاں خوشنما لگیں، مکروہ منظر تصویر دکھائی دیں، غلیظ آنتیں روشنی کی لکیریں نظر آئیں، خون کو شراب اور موت کو نیند سے تعبیر کرو. وہ شاعر سے پھولوں کے ہار مانگتے ہیں تاکہ ان کی گولیوں سے چھلنی ہونے والوں کی قبریں سجائی جا سکیں. پھر منڈیلا پر ان کی نظم صرف 466 اوور 64 نمبر ہے جو اس جزیرے کی زمین پر قلبہ رانی اور روشیں صاف کرتا ہے، مگر تم ایک قوت ہو، ایک استقامت ہو اور اپنے بیٹوں کی شریانوں میں جاری و ساری ہو. Of course, his ghazals are a great expression of the deepest of human feelings and emotions. The overflow of emotion in ghazal verses makes Faraz Sahib a romantic poet as per the Hegelian definition of Romanticism. However, I personally believe that emotions expressed in his ghazals, though personalized, relate with universal existential drives and setbacks of humanity. He says, احتیاط اے اہل محبت کہ اسی شعر میں لوگ، احتیاط اے اہل محبت کہ اسی شعر میں لوگ گل بدستاتے ہیں، پابرسن جاتے ہیں، اور جب سب کے دلوں میں گھر کرے تو پھر کیوں ہمیں در بدر کرے تو، اور دور دیسوں سے کالے کوسوں سے کوئی آواز آ رہی ہے ابھی، اور دیکھ پندار ان آشفتہ سروں کا کہ جنہیں، دیکھ پندار ان آشفتہ سروں کا کہ جنہیں بخت منصور ملا تخت سکندر نہ ملا. اور فراز اس شعر میں کس کو دکھاؤں، فراز اس شہر میں کس کو دکھاؤں زخم اپنے، یہاں تو ہر کوئی مجھ سا بدن پہنے ہوئے ہے، اور جورے حبیب و پرسش اغیار ایک سے، گو زخم الگ الگ ہیں مگر وار ایک سے. Faraz Sahib's in-depth and multi-dimensional descriptions of the beloved are legendary. However, despite appearing only personal, they are dedicated to capturing the very essence of beauty through the charm and grandeur of human form. Look at these examples. زلف کو ہم سری کا دعویٰ تھا، زلف کو ہم سری کا دعویٰ تھا، پھر بھی خوش قامتی زیادہ تھی، سرف پر پیرن گل بھی سجے خوب مگر، سرف پر پیرن گل بھی سجے خوب مگر، یار کی قامت زیبا پہ قبا اور لگی، اور وہ سرو قد ہے مگر بے گلے مراد نہیں کہ اس شجر پہ شگوفے ثمر کے دیکھتے ہیں، اور تیرے ہی طلت و گیسو کی دھوپ چھاؤں سے دھوپ چھاؤں ہے، تیرے ہی طلت و گیسو کی دھوپ چھاؤں ہے، کہاں کی صبح بنارس کہاں کی شام اودھ. فروغ حسن سے خیرہ تھی آنکھیں، فروغ حسن سے خیرہ تھی آنکھیں، سو ابر زلف نے چلمن گرائی، تیری آنکھوں کے آگے کب سے نرگس کھڑی ہے لے کے کشکول گدائی، اور نشاط وصل سے ہیں تتلیاں مست، نشاط وصل سے ہیں تتلیاں مست، دھلا سبزے سے زنگار جدائی. And this last couplet from his Qasida Manotu, which he wrote in praise of Qalam, a symbol of creative writing. کسی بہار شمائل کی بات کر کے بنے ہر ایک حرف شگوفہ ہر ایک لفظ کمل. These and many of his delicately rendered tributes to human form and its sublime beauty are actually a direct manifestation of the eternal link between love and beauty. Faraz is all love, and love revolves only around the sublimely beautiful, which resists any distortions by injustice and oppression. Hence, his love of beauty is simultaneously love of justice for all. Thank you very much. I appreciate your attention.